Have you ever wondered how the Israel-Hamas conflict began and evolved over the years? This is a question that has perplexed many as they try to untangle the complex threads of this ongoing strife. The Israel-Hamas conflict, a saga punctuated by ceasefires and escalations, holds a significant place in global politics. It's a narrative that has been shaped by a series of key events, from the birth of Hamas in 1987 to the Oslo Accords in 1993 and the Second Intifada in 2000. Each chapter in this saga has been marked by acts of violence and military offensives from both sides. In recent times, the conflict has seen a new wave of escalation, sparked by clashes between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters in Jerusalem. This escalation has led to a cycle of rocket attacks from Gaza and Israeli airstrikes, resulting in numerous casualties and widespread destruction. Our objective here is to thread together these disparate pieces of the puzzle, providing you with a chronological understanding of how this conflict has evolved over the years. By tracing the roots and the subsequent growth of this conflict, we aim to provide a comprehensive picture of the Israel-Hamas turmoil. So let's dive into the history of this conflict, starting from its roots. The year was 1987, a critical year in the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The air was thick with tension, and the streets echoed with cries for justice and freedom. Amidst this turmoil, a new player emerged on the scene, a group known as Hamas. Hamas, an Arabic acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement, was born out of a potent mix of frustration, desperation, and a yearning for self-determination. Its roots can be traced back to the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, a pan-Islamic organization that had been quietly fostering its presence in Gaza for decades. The creation of Hamas was not an isolated event. It was a reaction to the mounting discontent among Palestinians, particularly in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. This period was marked by the First Intifada, a widespread uprising against Israeli occupation that began in December of that same year. The First Intifada was a turning point in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Palestinian civilians, armed with nothing more than stones and their indomitable spirit, faced off against one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The images of David versus Goliath resonated around the globe, drawing international attention to the plight of the Palestinians. In this charged atmosphere, Hamas found fertile ground. It presented itself as a radical alternative to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, promising to continue the fight against Israeli occupation and vowing to establish an Islamic state in the area. Its charter, published in 1988, openly called for the destruction of Israel, a stance that has been both a rallying cry for its supporters and a point of contention for its critics. Hamas's emergence was a game-changer. It not only added a new dimension to the Israel-Palestine conflict, but also created a rift within the Palestinian political landscape, setting the stage for future confrontations. Thus, the stage was set for a new player in the Israel-Palestine conflict. This player, Hamas, born out of a turbulent time, would go on to play a pivotal role in the unfolding drama of the Middle East. The consequences of its birth continue to reverberate through the region, shaping the course of events in ways that are both profound and deeply complex. Fast forward to 1993, a year marked by hope and despair. The world witnessed the signing of the Oslo Accords, a set of agreements between the government of Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO. These accords were born out of a desire for peace, a desperate need to end decades of bloodshed and hostility. They were intended to give Palestinians self-governance, beginning with the Gaza Strip and the West Bank city of Jericho. The end goal? A mutual recognition of sovereignty and a road towards lasting peace. But as it often happens with such lofty ideals, reality took a different path. 7 years later, in September 2000, the Second Intifada erupted. This was a period of intensified Palestinian-Israeli violence, which some say was triggered by the visit of the then Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon to the area of Jerusalem's Old City, known as the Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif. The Second Intifada, also known as the Al-Aqsa Intifada, was marked by a wave of suicide bombings, shootings, and widespread riots. It was a time of heightened tensions and escalated conflict. The death toll was high, with thousands of Palestinians and hundreds of Israelis losing their lives. This period presented a stark contrast to the optimism that the Oslo Accords initially brought. It seemed that the agreements, instead of paving the way for peace, had become a source of further tension. The Accords were criticized for their ambiguity and for leaving too many crucial issues unresolved, such as the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the boundaries of Israel. In the end, the Oslo Accords, once a beacon of hope, seemed to be fading into the annals of history. They became a symbol of a peace process that had not only stalled but had also, in many ways, backtracked. The Second Intifada was a clear sign of this regression, a grim reminder of the deep-seated issues that still needed to be addressed. The new millennium brought with it new challenges and escalations. As the world entered the 21st century, the conflict between Israel and Hamas took a turn for the worse. The uneasy peace that had held since the Oslo Accords was shattered by a series of violent acts and military offensives. In the early years of the new century, the Second Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation, marked a significant escalation in the conflict. This uprising was marked by suicide bombings, shootings, and the use of rockets and mortars. Hamas, seen by many as the driving force behind the Intifada, was held responsible for many of these attacks. Israel, in turn, retaliated with a series of military offensives. These offensives, aimed at eradicating the threat posed by Hamas, often resulted in widespread destruction and loss of life. The cycle of violence seemed unending, with each act of aggression met with an equally forceful response. As the years rolled on, the conflict only intensified. Clashes between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters became a common occurrence. These confrontations often escalated into rocket attacks from Gaza and Israeli airstrikes, further inflaming the situation. A key event in this escalating conflict was the annual flag march by Israeli nationalists through Jerusalem's Old City. Celebrating Israel's capture of the Old City in the 1967 Middle East War, the march was seen by Hamas and many Palestinians as a provocation. Hamas threatened renewed violence if the march entered Muslim neighborhoods, further heightening tensions. In the face of these escalating tensions and violent confrontations, the dream of a lasting peace seemed further away than ever. The conflict, deeply rooted in historical grievances and fueled by acts of aggression on both sides, showed no signs of abating. The conflict was far from over and peace seemed elusive. In recent years, the conflict has taken a more intense and destructive turn. The spark that ignited the most recent escalation was a series of clashes between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters in Jerusalem. These skirmishes, fueled by long-standing grievances and tensions, rapidly snowballed into a full-blown confrontation. The situation escalated dramatically with the launching of rocket attacks from Gaza, met with retaliatory airstrikes by Israel. The air was thick with the smoke of burning buildings, the echoes of explosions, and the cries of those caught in the crossfire. The fierce exchange resulted in numerous casualties and widespread destruction on both sides, painting a grim picture of the human cost of this conflict. Amid this chaos, Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire, a lull in the storm, a chance to catch one's breath. But the ceasefire, as history has shown, is often a fragile and fleeting respite. In the aftermath, the landscape of Gaza and parts of Israel lay scarred and battered, a testament to the ferocity of the recent conflict. And even as the dust settled, the undercurrents of tension remain, simmering just beneath the surface. The annual flag march by Israeli nationalists through Jerusalem's Old City, for instance, has been a flashpoint of contention. Celebrating Israel's capture of the Old City in the 1967 Middle East War, the march passes through the Muslim quarter, seen by many Palestinians and by Hamas as a provocation. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett supports the planned route of the march, while there are calls for a rethink due to the risks involved. This exemplifies the delicate and volatile nature of the situation, where even a single spark could potentially reignite the flames of conflict. Like a haunting refrain, the cycle of violence continues, with no end in sight. The Israel-Hamas conflict, a saga of violence and political struggle, continues to shape our world. From the birth of Hamas in 1987 to the Oslo Accords and the Second Intifada, we've journeyed through a complex web of events that have defined and intensified this tumultuous relationship. We've seen the escalation of tensions punctuated by acts of violence and military offensives from both sides, painting a stark picture of a conflict deeply rooted in historical and political narratives. Today's landscape is no less complex, with recent clashes in Jerusalem and the ongoing nationalist flag march adding fuel to an already volatile situation. The path to peace is fraught with challenges, as the conflict is not only about territorial disputes, but also about ideological differences, religious sentiments, and national identities. It's a complex puzzle where every piece is entwined with another, making the task of achieving a peaceful resolution an immensely challenging endeavor. As we ponder on the future, one can only hope for a peaceful resolution to this enduring conflict.